And on the wrap tonight, Indiana Governor Mike Pence pledges to fix his state's religious freedom law, to the disappointment of some conservatives and many in the media. Secretary of State John Kerry and a coalition of world powers not able to get a deal done with Iran. And a House Benghazi committee wants Hillary Clinton to come back to Congress for a little chat about her email servers. Will she? Really? What difference does it make? We'll cover it all tonight, and that's on the Daily Wrap. And welcome to the show, everybody. I am Joe Concha with my co-host, the man his political foes in the Nixon White House called Tricky Rick.
They called me a lot worse than that.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I wonder where they got Tricky Dick from now. We know.
They called me so much worse.
He's also a Forbes columnist and a Sirius XM host. He is Rick Unger. Also, we're joined by attorney Heather Hansen and the Wisdom Daily editor and Newsmax contributor, Mr. Brad Hirschfield. Say hi, Brad. Hi. Let's go to the Daily Download.
Clearly, there's been misunderstanding and confusion and mischaracterization. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was about religious liberty, not about discrimination.
And that's Governor Mike Pence today, going on a PR offensive to defend his religious freedom law that has come under attack for being anti-gay. Besides the press conference, Pence, in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, used the space to clarify that he is not anti-gay. Here's more from the press conference.
As I said last week, had this law been about legalizing discrimination, I would have vetoed it. This law does not give anyone a license to discriminate. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana does not give anyone the right to deny services to anyone in this state.
And here's a little more.
I don't believe for a minute that it was the intention of the General Assembly to create a license to discriminate or a right to deny services to gays, lesbians, or anyone else in this state. And it certainly wasn't my intent.
Finally, Mr. Pence declaring what many of his critics wanted to hear.
I've come to the conclusion that it would be helpful to move legislation this week that makes it clear that this law does not give businesses a right to deny services to anyone.
The White House also weighing in today. Here's White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest.
This piece of legislation flies in the face of the kinds of values that people all across the country strongly support. We've seen the governor and other Indiana officials in damage control mode here because this law has provoked an outcry.
Earnest went on to say that the law, quote, flies in the face of the values that people across the country strongly support, unquote. But as Pence has said, the law is almost identical to the Federal Religious Freedom Act of 1993 passed by President Bill Clinton. Let's take a look at the two. This is the 93 version. Government may substantially burden a person's exercise of religion only if it demonstrates that application of the burden to the person is in furtherance of a compelling governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling governmental interest. Okay, so remember some words in there because we see some very similar language here. Governmental entity, substantially burden a person's exercise of religion. Let's move down a little bit. Furtherance again, that word of a compelling governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling governmental interest. Rick, I see these two side by side. We just read them. Right. Educate the viewers what the difference is between the 93 federal law and what we're hearing about in Indiana.
Here's the problem, and those things do mirror each other, as do many other things in both the federal law and the state law. The problem is there's a Section 7 in the Indiana law that you do not find in the federal law. And what Section 7 does, the federal law and the state law tells you that if the federal government passes a law, or now the state government passes a law that infringes on your religious activities, you can use that as a defense against the government.
Give me an example of a religious activity.
Hobby Lobby is a great example.
Okay.
Obamacare says that Hobby Lobby has to provide certain contraceptives to their workers. That infringed on their religious beliefs. Court said, no, you don't have to do it.
Did you agree with that ruling, by the way?
I actually did agree with that ruling,
Okay.
yes. Now, what's different in the Indiana law, or added to it, is it allows it in private situations. This is the case of the baker who doesn't want to bake the cake for the gay wedding. So that is the difference, and that's the difference that really has caused all the problem. Both the media has been disingenuous about this because they haven't really told the truth about what this is. No, it doesn't say you are free to go out and discriminate. It provides you with a defense in certain scenarios if you do. The governor hasn't been entirely honest either, because he keeps saying that this mirrors the law that Bill Clinton signed, but there is a hugely important section that doesn't, and that's the point.
Okay,
Well,
Heather.
there's a couple things. One is that the federal law has been interpreted different ways.
Yes.
It has been interpreted to say that it actually applies to
And
persons,
it's been
to people,
interpreted to say
and
that
the
it
other
doesn't.
way as well.
Right.
But here's the thing that no one's talking about. In the 20 years that any of these laws have been around, they have never, not once, been successfully used to defend a discrimination claim. In California, in Washington, in Minnesota, and New Mexico, there were gay people who pursued a case for discrimination, and in not one of those cases did the person who discriminated win under these types of laws. So to say that this
But
is
isn't that why they added this
no,
clause 7?
they added this clause in order to provide, as you said, the defense. It is not going to pass muster unless there are specific circumstances. This law was not
Like
written
what?
to, well, arguably there are certain, like what we talked about yesterday. If a Catholic company, and it has to be a closely held company, makes bulletins or flyers for Catholic churches, and someone asks them to do abortion flyers,
right.
that would arguably work.
So if that works, and I agree with you, that example, how do you know that the other example of the baker wouldn't?
It never has, and I trust our juries and I trust our judges. Laws are only as good as their interpretation.
Let's get the religious guy
That's
in
the
here.
key. Legislation demands interpretation. We are trying right now to legislate to preclude the very interpretive processes that keep a legal system and a culture robust.
why put
The
it in?
truth is, it's put in because there is anxiety, because the truth is we have two competing issues here. We have progressives who generally want to narrow religious expression and freedom of religion to freedom of worship, and it's much bigger than that. And we have conservatives who often want to confuse their right to be who they are with the right to curtail others or make them conform. We've got to have those conversations. Right now we're just getting more litigation and legislation. We need more conversation and interpretation.
The good news is we're going to talk about this more in the next segment because it's that big. Either way, we're also going to talk about how wedding cakes are an absolute ripoff. Anyway, more on Pence, more on Indiana. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. So has the media treated Governor Pence and the story in Indiana fairly? Well, according to the Media Research Center analysis, that answer is no. During the past 3 days, TV networks have promoted the opponents of the law over supporters at a rate of 2-to-1. And that research was done through sound bites and quotes and arguments criticizing the Religious Freedom Act. 2-to-1, it's felt like more than 10, like 10-to-1. Anyway, from the very beginning, CNN took the opportunity to frame the debate how they wanted. Here is Daily Beast editor-in-chief John Avlon on CNN.
So what you get is that incredibly awkward stonewalling by Mike Pence yesterday, where he cannot answer a simple question whether or not the state of Indiana should be able to discriminate against gays and lesbians. This puts him in the same position as George Wallace was a generation ago by saying that, you know what, I'm not in favor of segregation. I never have been. This is about states' rights and the Constitution. So you elevate the ugly to try to remain politically pure, and it never, ever works.
Mr. Avlon is also a CNN contributor. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has used the opportunity to comment on the bill, of course, on Twitter. Ironic, since her husband signed the very similar bill into law over 20 years ago. She wrote, quote, "Sad this is Indiana law can happen in America today. We shouldn't discriminate against people because of who they love. Hashtag LGBT, end quote." And celebrities, of course, have been jumping in the bandwagon as well. Mia Farrow, who wrote, quote, "Shame on Indiana Governor Mike Pence. Bigotry and discrimination have nothing to do with God's will," end quote. Nothing about Ronan Farrow losing his show, by the way, poor guy. Anyway, here is Ashton Kutcher, who tweeted, quote, "Indiana, are you going to allow Christian establishments to ban Jews from coming in or vice versa? Religious freedom, 3 question marks, hashtag outrage," end quote. Ashton still owes me $12 for that disaster called What Happens in Vegas with Cameron Diaz, by the way. Anyway, Indiana is certainly feeling the pressure from the business community as a result of the media mob as well. Apple CEO Tim Cook condemned the law, but of course, if you want to buy an iPad in countries that punish gays with death, like Saudi Arabia, no problem at all. Brad, let's start with you, but first, let me share this because I did jump into this before. The national average cost of wedding cakes and desserts will be $451 in 2014. In places like New York, and I know this because I got married a couple of years ago, $1,200 for a freaking carrot cake, all right? So the whole controversy could have been avoided. You know, that whole example around getting the wedding cake, just don't get a wedding cake.
Don't get a cake.
It's
By the way,
simple.
that you spent $1,200 for a cake, we have to talk after the show, because I have a lot of respect for you. We're going to have to recalibrate that. $1,200 for a cake?
You have to, it's symbolic. You cut the cake.
I love it, I know. You're talking to a guy who believes in symbols. But that's exactly why I'm sensitive to both sides here. Both the gay couple that wants to be able to walk into a bakery and proudly say, we're getting married. We're not just having a party. We're getting married, and they want the affirmation of the baker who will put that couple on top of the cake. And it's also I'm sensitive to especially those Christian audiences that say, do you understand the power of that cake? You'll get smart people like Joe Concha to spend $1,200 for a carrot cake because that symbol is so powerful. So now when you ask us to put that two male or two female couple on top of the cake, it's not just a cake. And that's why all these talking heads who tend to know God's will. I mean, Mia Farrow knows God's will? Please, it's ridiculous. George Wallace?
She was married to Frank Sinatra.
And Sinatra is a
that
God.
in
Well,
mind.
I'm sure he made her shout, oh my God.
that in
But
mind.
that's a separate issue, okay? I have no doubt about that.
I didn't see that
But what is going on here? The truth is, why don't we have people who understand the power of being denied their wedding cake, and people whose lives are staked on an understanding of God's will that precludes decorating that cake, start talking to each other. And let's do that for a year or two and see what kind of policy we make after that.
Rick.
I think, there's some truth to the notion that the media has been unfair. I think it's based on a few things, and I don't think Indiana did much to help themselves. Never did anybody who was involved with this law in Indiana explain what it was really about. They're so afraid that Americans can't understand it that they left a vacuum that the media gladly filled with the way they wanted to explain it, and they did go over the top. They weren't fair about it. If you just explain it, people will understand it, and then the media won't have to fill in the gap.
There was such a disconnect here. It immediately went to Indiana discriminates against gays and lesbians. That's what this law means. And it brought me back to, of all people, Tony Dungy. Dungy is an analyst for NBC Sports, former coach of the Colts and the Buccaneers, the guy who volunteered to mentor Michael Vick after he killed dogs and he was in prison. A good person, a good Christian. And what he said about Michael Sam, who was the gay football player from Missouri who was trying out in the NFL, he said, personally, I wouldn't draft him. It would be too much of a distraction. Just like Tim Tebow is too much of a distraction. But yet everybody jumped to immediately that Dungy, since he's a really religious guy, must be a bigot. And the social mob against Tony Dungy.
That's actually very fair and a good example, because if somebody else had said the same thing, people would have gone, yeah, I get that. You're absolutely right
And that's
about
why
that.
Who Speaks Matters here. It would be so interesting that people most concerned about embracing gay marriage in the culture would actually look out a little bit better for the rights of gay people. And if the people who are out there advocating for full inclusion of the gay, lesbian, bi, transgendered community would actually meet real people who don't agree with them and advocate for their rights a little bit and protect their religious dignity a little bit. If we look out for each other as opposed to just campaigning for ourselves, we would be a lot better off, I think.
So my question was, eventually, sorry, we everybody just made good points, so you're not being scolded anyway. But when 2016 comes around, will this now be the litmus test? If you want to run for president as a Republican, boy, you better make sure that you steer clear of any kind of controversy like this.
I don't know. I mean, Jeb Bush already
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, they've already taken a stance in favor of the legislation. I think that the problem is
just
that
got
all of
bailed
this
out
has to
on
be
it.
put in context. Well, but Arkansas is passing a similar law today that the governor's going to sign in. So we're going to hear about this again, and people are going to learn more. And it's not going to be this immediate reaction that we're seeing. It's going to be, this will calm down, and people will begin to discuss things, and they'll begin to understand, and they'll begin to talk to one another about what this law really means. And it, I don't think, will be of the same level of an emotional response as it is right now.
You brought it up yesterday. You brought up Ferguson. And hands up, don't shoot, which in the Department of Justice report said did not happen, and in footnote 28 in that report, blamed the media for perpetuating that lie. We're just seeing that same thing over here, right? That what we talked about, that basic narrative that is wrong, is now being pushed in this capacity.
People who have been discriminated against, whether it's African Americans or gay people, are taking on this new thing and using it to further their aims. And they have a right to want to do that, but they're just perhaps picking the wrong vehicle in which to get a little bit further along.
True.
You know what the smart Republican will say about this? Nothing. Why? Because social issues are not a part of the job of President of the United States. And the smartest one who stands up and says it is who's going to get elected.
That's right. And who hasn't said anything so far? His name is John Kasich.
I knew that was coming.
Coming up next, the latest on Iran. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, and he is Rick Unger. And we're also joined by Heather Hansen and Brad Hirschfield. Well, as you know, the United States and other world powers are in talks with Iran to limit their nuclear capability while lifting sanctions. Today is the self-imposed deadline to get a deal done. And now I can announce to you and the world that a deal has been completed. Everyone around the big boy table has now agreed to extend the talks one more day. Yeah, that's about it. Deadlines are for suckers. Otherwise, not a few things to report, really. I mean, we'll run through the litany of laundry list items. Iran wants sanctions lifted immediately. They are resisting giving up their nuclear stockpile. Even the duration of time that Iran has to behave before it's allowed to have nukes hasn't been settled. France pushing for an even longer deadline in the irony of ironies. And at this point, from what we can tell from reports, Iran is making all the demands and giving up nada. So, what does America think? Well, according to a Washington Post ABC News poll, 59% of Americans, nearly 6 in 10, support a deal in which the U.S. and its partners lift economic sanctions in exchange for restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. Okay. 31% oppose a deal. Support the deal basically split along party lines. Not surprisingly, almost 3/4 of Democrats support a deal. Take the blinders off. And here's the most shocking part. 59%, there's that number again, also think a deal with Iran will not prevent them from attaining nukes. Okay, 100% of our panel knows that. So, Rick, why do Americans support a deal with Iran if they don't think it'll work?
You know, it's even more interesting than that. There was a poll out yesterday from Pew that pretty much confirms everything we saw in the Washington Post poll. The numbers were just a shade different.
Didn't you write about this?
I did write about it. The one thing, though, that they said that they didn't discuss today, which I thought was amazing, yes, majority wants a deal, but an even larger majority, 75%, wants it to go to Congress. Now, Congress is less popular than poison ivy and prickly heat, and yet the people still want Congress to deal with it. What does that say?
What does
that
say?
Says they do not have confidence in their president. And what I did discuss in my article today at Forbes.com is how it takes a certain relationship that a president has to have with the American people to be able to lead us into what are risky, important adventures. I talked about John Kennedy and how, because of the love affair the country had with him, he was able to take big risks in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which saved the world. I talked about Ronald Reagan and the relationship he had with the country and how he was able to make major changes in the world. Franklin Roosevelt, his relationship got us through the war. They had special relationships with America. Barack Obama, who I tend to be supportive of in most cases, has never been able to establish that relationship. And I think that's very much why the country's not prepared to follow him in something that they innately understand is critically important to the world.
Interesting. Heather?
I think that is the case. I think also there's a lot of issues that we're not talking about here as far as, for example, I think the Americans want a deal. I think even Netanyahu wants a deal. It's just, what does the deal look like?
Whoa. Netanyahu wants a deal?
I think he does want a deal. It's
The right deal?
the right deal.
Not this deal. And that's the point. You're 100% right.
And the only entity that doesn't want a deal is Iran.
Right.
What they want is to continue this, because I read today that they are making back, because we lifted some sanctions in 2013, they are making back $700 million a month in lifted money, in sanctions money that will get
their
instilled
economy actually
again.
moved ahead this year
Right.
for the
It
first
moved ahead
time.
for the
So
first
they're
time.
going to stretch this out as long as they possibly can, and then keep on taking that money, and then go ahead and make their bombs. So this is great for them. At some point, we're going to have to draw a real red line, not a fake one, and say enough is enough.
I think that's the key. Talking is really generally important because when you're typically talking, you're not killing each other. But here's the thing. What divides talking and negotiating from appeasing? And we know what it is. When the other side is allowed to enrich itself and keep pursuing the goals you claim to be fighting against, and that's what the talking allows, you're no longer negotiating, you're appeasing. So it will be really interesting. We know it's going to happen. They're going to get the extra 90 days. It's going to take us out to June. There likely won't be a deal then anyway. But we'll be interested. What's going to happen now in the next 90 days when there is no deal substantively?
Here.
And we got to get past the fighting. I would love to say a real commitment to the 90 days, but let's dial back some of the rewards from the last year. And let's actually use carrot and stick. Right now we've got carrot people with no sticks and stick people with no carrots. This is a moment we could actually deploy both if we're smart.
The whole thing about this is that the Iranians need the deal, right? You said their economy is moving forward, but boy, they would like all those economic sanctions lifted, right?
Sure.
We simply want a deal because primarily, from what I can gather, it's good for the president's legacy, I guess. But if we can't verify their centrifuges anyway, then it's pointless. So it's all about checking off a box for President Obama.
I always feel like I got to remind you, we don't know yet what's in the deal, and maybe we can. We don't know.
He should
But
be
here's the
less
two
opaque.
words why they might not need the deal. North Korea. People will act against their material self-interest to get what their vision demands.
That's right. Remember when Hans Brix went there to try to inspect?
That's right.
That was in a movie, but still, it went horribly for him. He was eaten by a shock. Anyway, potluck next. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. It's potluck time. This is the part of the show where we go around the table and share our favorite stories of the day. Heather Hansen, what did you bring to the party?
You may have heard some time ago there was a case in California where some kids went to school with American flag shirts on. It was Cinco de Mayo. They were celebrating Cinco de Mayo. This is a school in California. They were sent home for wearing the American flag shirts. They then filed a lawsuit saying that their First Amendment freedom of religion rights had been violated.
Okay.
The court found that that was not the case, that in school you have to worry about the other students' right not to be offended is really what it came down to. And the Supreme Court this week denied appeal. So that is the law. They refused to look at it. So what it really means, and we always knew in schools, there was a case in the 60s called Tinker, where you always knew that there was a weighing to be done about the students' freedom and of religion versus their safety and the ability to stop there from being fights. But when you start telling kids, I mean, can you imagine if American kids in Mexico wore American flags to a 4th of July party or a 4th of July representation, if what the Mexican government would do? It's just this idea that you can't wear an American flag in America in and of itself is absolutely reprehensible to me. And then add to that these kids' rights, they weren't starting fights, they weren't throwing punches. All they were doing is wearing t-shirts. And the fact that that is now so offensive to other people that they can no longer do it is really, really a sad day.
What was the argument against? Was it that these kids were wearing the T-shirts to provoke?
Well, that it was going to provoke, and maybe they were
Potentially
wearing it.
could
right.
provoke.
That's what it was, because that's another argument that can be made, Joe, when you're doing these cases. That's an argument that often comes up, that if you're wearing a shirt, and usually it's personal. If my shirt says Joe's ugly, then we may have an issue. But if I say guys with black hair are ugly, then that may be speech. And so you really have to weigh those issues. And here, simply wearing a shirt, not throwing punches, not speaking initially to specific people is really too much.
Okay.
It really is.
By the way, to your Joe's ugly comment, there actually was a band back in 1992 called Ugly Kid Joe.
See that?
Yeah.
Were you offended?
Was I offended?
Yeah.
No, I actually got one
Were
of the
you in
T-shirts. Yeah, I was a bass player.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy.
I
Just
agree
two
with
notes.
what Brad said when we were on the break about this. I'm surprised also that the Supreme Court did not take this up.
They should
I
have.
am.
Well, they
They
did,
should
and it's
have.
interesting. They also rejected the case from New York City. The schools have a ban in New York City about not allowing schools to be used to house religious services. So something is going on with the court, I think, about trying to narrowly construct and intervene in these local issues connected to schools, which I get. But here's the exception. The fact that the school didn't admit we as a school have a serious problem if allowing these kids, which I get, you can restrict because they're kids and blah, 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 but that we as a community have a very serious problem if the presence of an American flag at a Cinco de Mayo celebration would be so provocative that we have to keep these kids from doing it, and maybe they did in that moment, but to have not corrected that, big problem.
Absolutely.
Okay, you get the final word and your first word in your potluck.
Okay, Trevor Noah, 2 words, who we know is going to replace, Jon Stewart, who's getting in trouble for a whole variety of tweets that he has shared. I think we have some of them on screen.
Not recent tweets. Let's
No, they're old, and I wouldn't judge anyone by a single tweet, but they include things like Messi gets ball and real players try to foul him, but Messi doesn't go down easy, just like Jewish chicks.
Oh boy.
Girls with big butts are like girls without power steering. Great feedback, but you need to work hard to keep control. Behind every successful rap billionaire is a double as rich Jew man. And finally, no, he actually wrote Jewish man. Originally, when men proposed, they went down on one knee. So if the woman said no, they were in perfect uppercut position. Now, this story first broke because of concerns about his anti-Semitism. The truth is, sometimes he's funny when he does anti-Semitic things. He did one tweet, almost ran down a Jewish kid, and I would have felt bad because it was a German car. And I did think that was kind of funny. Someone tweets back, how did you know? He tweets back, because the parents looked Jewish. He has a problem, but more than a Jewish problem, he has a woman problem. Jokes about fat women, jokes about hitting women, this is a problem. And I think Comedy Central has a problem. I'm not saying he shouldn't get the job, and I respect they didn't go the easy route and just look for, a redux of Jon Stewart. But this is the opposite of Jon Stewart, who knew how to provoke without being hateful. And this stuff is actually hateful.
Yeah, there seems to be some anger with Mr. Noah that I've noticed in his tweets. I haven't seen a lot of his work on The Daily Show.
Right.
He's only done 3 appearances.
Three things, yeah.
But do you think that they're having buyer's remorse already, Heather?
Well, they say that they're not, and you do have to give. I don't know how old those were. They're,
4 or 5
already,
years.
A couple years.
already there was someone who was working for Jeb Bush and somebody who was working for Scott Walker who have been fired or left because of their old tweets. And this is the problem. This stuff lives with you forever. Whether or not he's going to be able to make up for it, he says I'm an equal opportunity offender type of deal because he is from South Africa and he's biracial and he has a lot of stuff going on himself. But he's going to have some making up to do for sure.
If there's a takeaway here, and it's not just for him, the stuff you put out online,
forever.
it's forever.
It lives
and
forever.
we need an ethic of forever ideas, because my ideas, they're not forever ideas most often. So be careful.
The old saying is that there's no bad PR except for your own obituary. So maybe this is creating some sort of weird buzz that we don't know about. But again, it's all about the show when it comes on in a couple months. Anyway, my potluck coming up, and Rick's. This is the Daily Wrap only on Newsmax. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm your host, Joe Conchin. If you're just joining us, we're in the middle of our potluck where we're sharing our favorite stories of the day, including mine. So I want to talk to you about conversations. It's kind of wordplay-ish. So we remember the Rolling Stone debacle around the UVA rape story, right? And basically, in the end, it was a work of fiction. But, we were told, and but's a very big word in today's dialogue, but at least there's a conversation going on now about rape and a rape culture on campus. So even though the story was basically based on a complete lie, according to the Charlottesville Police Department anyway, and the Washington Post and actually credible publications, well, at least we started a conversation around rape. Then we look at Ferguson that I brought up before. Hands up, don't shoot. Oops, that didn't happen. But at least we started a conversation around police departments and the way they handle their relationship with minorities. And yeah, there were some protests, and yeah, property values have gone down in Ferguson 50% from August before the protests happened, which are, by the way, the homes owned by predominantly black people within that city. I know there was some collateral damage, but at least we're having the conversation now, right? And then there's Ellen Poe. Did you hear about her? Is it Poe or Poe?
I think it's Poe.
It's
but
Poe?
I'm not positive.
Okay, so she sued in Silicon Valley. Her venture capital firm said there was all sorts of horrible things going on in terms of misogyny, and it's just a complete boys club. And she brought it to court, and everybody in the media, particularly Silicon Valley media, was rooting for her, and they thought she was going to win, and this was a slam dunk, and every single claim was thrown out. No matter, the media still says, but she won. You know why? Because we're having a conversation
but one
about...
important distinction.
Yes.
She was the one who first said, well, at least we're having an important discussion now.
Right.
She did it herself.
So forget the fact that she could have made
know,
something like
millions,
$160 million. And not just one claim was thrown out, all of them were. But if you read what the final scorecard was, it was, but we're having a conversation about gender inequality in Silicon Valley. And I'm just sick of butts at this point. No more butts based on lies. I'm sick of it. You guys, take over. I'm exhausted.
Actually, I like that one. That
Thank
was
you.
good.
Yeah, I wrote about it in Media.
I agree with you. I think that it's a rationalization, a way to feel better, because a lot of these things are harmful. They're harmful to our relationships. They're harmful to our communities, and so there's got to be some way to say, well, what's the good that comes of this? And I think that good that we grasp on is that we are having this conversation.
Let's have a conversation about this. My sources are telling me that as early as tomorrow, Senator Menendez, the Democrat of the state of New Jersey.
You transitioned to yourself.
You like that?
Great.
You like that?
You are a co-host.
That's why I get the big bucks, folks.
There you go. Very cool.
Will be indicted. He will be indicted. The key to the claims are twofold from what I'm hearing. One has to do with his friend whose name is Dr. Solomon Melgen, who apparently overbilled Medicare for $9 million. Apparently it was a clerical error, right? $9 million. He did pay the money back, but not before Senator Menendez went to the CMS, which oversees Medicare, and tried to intervene on his behalf. Then, because that wasn't good enough for his buddy, he went to the State Department and asked them to put pressure on the Dominican Republic, because the Dominican Republic was apparently not honoring a port protection agreement that they had entered into with this same Dr. Melgen. So that's what's coming tomorrow. Now, for those of you who are sitting there thinking, yeah, I know what this is all about. Menendez turned on Obama, on Iran, so they're just getting payback. Not so. This was a grand jury investigation that began months and months before this. And this is not something being pursued. It's being pursued by the Justice Department, but it's not something being handed down by edict. It's a grand jury, and don't discount the grand jury if you defended them in Ferguson.
I'm not discounting them at all, but it was signed off on by Holder a week or so after Menendez made that speech to AIPAC.
No. The what they found was signed off on. He would have had to have done that anyhow.
Well, not necessarily, because there's always deals. Even last week, they met with Holder. His representatives, Menendez representatives, met with Holder to talk about potentially dropping this. I'm not saying it's just political.
But the grand jury had to find it before he could sign off on it.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think, given the fact that Harry Reid was involved in all of this, and he set up the meeting that between Menendez and Sebelius, that's part of the allegations here, and he set up that meeting 2 months after the doctor contributed money to his super PAC. Do you think that that has any impact on his decision to retire?
No, I don't, actually.
Oh, you do? So you're consistent. Here's what I think.
You think that's why he's retiring? Seriously?
I think let me
I don't know if that's why he's retiring.
Let me answer.
Multiple things can be true.
Let me answer a question. The reason that I don't think that's true is because there was a big distinction that they made between what Harry Reid did and what Menendez did. Harry Reid basically, wait. Harry Reid answered a request from somebody in his delegation, and he went with him to a meeting. That's very, very different than somebody who got a political contribution and was best friends with the guy who tried to intervene.
But you've heard the tip of the iceberg. I think there may be more you'll hear about Harry Reid that may explain his retirement.
I seriously doubt it.
I don't know if we really will, but I think both can be true. And it may be that it's both. You're right, the grand jury found what they found, but there's no question the Justice Department got hot about this immediately after he went to bat for Netanyahu.
Oh, no, that's just not true. It's just
Coming up next, yay or nay, Daily Wrap, Newsmax. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. It's time for yay or nay. First up, Hillary Clinton's email scandal. It just won't go away. A House Select Committee on Benghazi today requesting a formal interview with the former Secretary of State over her use of a private email account and personal computer server during her tenure. Two-part yay or nay, everybody. Should she agree to the interview? And if she agrees, will anything worthwhile come out of it, Mr. Hirschfield?
I'm going to go with yay and nay. She should absolutely agree. She has to agree. She has no choice about agreeing if she's actually going to run for president. Will anything meaningful come out of it? I don't know. When you burn down the entire electronic record of everything you did while you served, it's hard to get any useful information.
Heather?
I think she's already agreed, and I think she's actually been smart. She said, I'll do it, but I want to do it in public because I don't want you spinning whatever we say in private and trying to use it against me, and I think that's smart, and I'm wondering if they're going to call her bluff. Will anything come of it? I don't know. USA Today reported today 4 emails that have already been produced that she gave back to the State Department. And each one of those has a little something that's a little bit distasteful, nothing, no burning fires, nothing that's going to totally rock the boat, but I think that there's stuff there.
Rick, you obviously think this will bring down the entire candidacy.
Oh, clearly. It's all over for her. I'm with Brad on this one, a yay and a nay. Yes, she'll do it, and I think apparently she's already said she'll do it, and nay, ain't nothing going to get to her on this.
Honestly, I have no yay or nay. What difference does it make? Our prayers have finally been answered. Well, most of us anyway. Mickey D's is going to try to sell breakfast menu items all day in some of its restaurants in San Diego beginning in April. Yep, studies have found that the most coveted items McDonald's sells are their fries and their breakfast items like hash browns and egg McMuffins and something called McGriddles. I obviously haven't been there for breakfast in a while. But try ordering any of those after 10:30 in the morning. The looks you get. What do you mean you want one of those? McDonald's stock has been dropping over the past few years, and there are still some kinks to work out, but San Diego, they're going to be the first to enjoy this. Will McDonald's make a comeback as a result of being able to order pancakes at 8 o'clock at night? Brad Hirschfield.
I don't know if I'd build a whole future of McDonald's on that. My parents used to live across from Mrs. Kroc. But
Mrs. what?
Mrs. Kroc, Ray Kroc's widow.
He started McDonald's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a nice old lady. So it turns out that we're a breakfast for dinner kind of family. So I think a lot of people are.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll rebuild the whole company, but why not? Definitely serve what you want whenever you want.
Makes sense.
I agree with that. You know what the big issue is? Griddle space. I was reading about it today. There's not enough space in the griddle for all the breakfast meats and the hamburgers. So it may be that the breakfast meats are going to take over. It's griddle space has always been the problem. You've been thinking, why can't I get my
grid
breakfast
space. It turns
at
out it's
noon?
griddle space.
It's griddle space. Now you know.
I haven't been in a McDonald's in 20 years. I so don't care. I'm going to go with Brad on this. Yeah, I mean, it might do well for them, but it's not going to reinvent their business.
Okay, I am a yay, and if I'm IHOP, I'm pretty scared. Right?
Yeah, you look frightened.
Or any diner in Jersey. Anyway, next, a Wichita man is facing 11 plus years in prison for, get this, stealing a wedding ring and purse out of a woman's truck as she was suffering a brain aneurysm at a Taco Bell drive-thru back in 2013. A jury convicted the man of aggravated burglary, robbery, misdemeanor theft, you name it. The victim, a wife and a mother of 2, was picking up dinner for her family when the aneurysm occurred and she crashed her truck into the speaker box of the drive-thru. She passed away the next day at the hospital. So this is a 2-part question as well. Should this man get life in prison? That's part 1. And should he be executed by firing squad, more like? The woman is dying and you're taking off the wedding ring. I mean, I don't even know if it's a yay or nay, more like just a reason for me to get angry again.
Yeah.
I think anger is clearly, look, it's grotesque, but I don't know that we should punish people because of how we feel about what they did. It really is about what the law is and what the infraction was. Is it gross? Is it horrible? Yeah, it's disgusting and it's an incredible tragedy. But I don't know the fact that she was having an aneurysm makes it worse than going down the street, breaking into someone's car, and ripping the jewelry off their hands if they're perfectly healthy.
Yeah, I guess, Heather, maybe he didn't know that she was dying,
No,
and maybe
he
just
knew.
thought that.
Not only did he know, but he was this guy.
Well, you just made me want to forgive a little
No,
bit.
don't forgive. I think that there's something wrong with this man, and I don't think he's capable of rehabilitation. He was on probation from a felony that he had already committed, and there are multiple other crimes that he has committed and been convicted of. Clearly, he's incapable of rehabilitation. And while I agree that you want the law to be consistent and you don't give people more sentences, this is a guy who should be locked away and kept away from society so that he's not stealing things from dead people.
So nay on the firing squad, but yay on the 11 years in prison.
I'll tell you what, in the control room should get ready with the bleep bleep machine. What we need, no. What we, what we need is a new felony where you can be punished for being a stark raving bleep bleep, because that's what I mean. This is one sick bleep bleep bleep. It's unbelievable. Horrible.
Interesting.
They're bleeping in my
They're
ear.
bleeping
They're
out.
bleeping on us.
I thought when you were going to go bleep, you're going to talk about that time where you used to use Morse code. Way back when. So.
No, he definitely
What a
is
jerk.
not. It's not as
Interesting.
if he was looking to feed his kids or something. It's just this whole story is so distasteful.
Sick
That's
guy.
true, and we have to end on a light note. So, Brad, I like your tie, looking good.
And I didn't
I like
steal it from a
everyone's
woman
tie.
dying of an aneurysm, so I've got that going for me.
You got that going. right.
That's a better. We always end on a light note. Anyway, panel, thank you so much. We'll be back here tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Daily Wrap. I'm Joe Concha saying, stay classy, planet Earth.